What's up, y'all? We are heading into week 15, and that means it is time for the fantasy playoffs. If you're watching this video, hopefully you've made it in and you've got some big decisions you've got to make this weekend. You're trying to figure out, who do you have in your starting lineup? Is there someone still sitting on the waiver wire that might give you some added upside down the stretch? That's why I've been in the utilization bunker for the last 36 hours, grinding the data, looking for the latest trends. And guess what? I have two players for you guys today that, we've soured on a little bit here recently. But guess what? The utilization data tells us there is a lot of room for optimism for both of these guys. So the first player we've got to talk about is Nick Chubb, someone that you were probably so proud to have on your fantasy lineup over the first stretch of 7, 8, 9 games. You had an RB1 on your hands. And then what's happened? Over the last several weeks, he's just really kind of fallen apart. We only have an 11.6 points per game over the last 4 contests. He's only cracked the top 12 once in that span. On the surface, it looks like maybe we don't have an RB1 any longer. But guess what? This is what's great about the utilization report. We want to really dig into not just the outputs, but the inputs. And the inputs that go into his usage tell us that he's actually potentially on track for the biggest role that we've seen in his career. So when we take a look at the utilization data for Nick Chubb, we can take a look at the first 10 weeks on the top, and then we can look at his last 4 weeks on the bottom. And what you'll start to quickly notice is over the last 4 games, his snaps are actually up 58% per game. His rushing attempts, they're right where they've been all season, almost at 60% per game, which is really nice compared to where we were last year when he was splitting more time with Kareem Hunt. But the big thing, 75% of the snaps to start a drive, that's up. 75% of the snaps on 1st and 10, also up. And the biggest thing is looking at the usage in the passing game. We are seeing career high utilization and the hurry up offense for Nick Chubb. This is just an area that we've never seen his game expanded into in the past. Now, he's getting almost half the work there. It's not a full-time role in the passing game, but we'll take anything we can get when we're talking about one of the best running backs in the league. 45% route participation over the last 2 games. Now let's talk about Nick Chubb's efficiency. So there are 50 running backs in the NFL with at least 70 rushing attempts this season. Listen to how Nick Chubb's doing. Missed tackles forced, 0.29 per attempt. That's first in the league. 3.50 yards after contact on average. That is 7th in the NFL. 16% of his carries go for 10 plus yards. That is 4th in the league. And then finally, his PFF rush grade, 90.0, is 3rd best. So while we have seen that downward trend in production, we're talking about a guy that has also not lost a step in efficiency. He is one of the best running backs in the NFL. So here's the deal with Nick Chubb. Unless you fundamentally believe something has changed with him and he's no longer a good running back, you should be as proud as ever to be putting him in your fantasy lineup. We have a great player that's actually probably got a chance to have the best role that he's ever had in his career. That keeps him as a mid-range RB1, and now his upside is higher than ever. He could be a high-end RB1 down the stretch for your fantasy team. So the second player we need to talk about is Elijah Moore. He has been a colossal bust in fantasy football this season. Wide receiver 84 overall. However, his utilization over the last 2 weeks suggests that he could still have life. So since week 6, we just really haven't seen Moore on the field as much. He made that trade demand, got into the doghouse with the coaching staff, and it hasn't been there. But over the last 2 games, we've started to see that potentially thaw out. A 74% route participation in week 13. Then that surged to 92% last week with Corey Davis leaving the game with a head injury. And guess what? He led the team with a 22% target share, and he's hit that number twice in the last 4 games. And not only that, the Jets offense is very different when we have Joe Flacco or we have Mike White under center. In those scenarios, we see the Jets throw the ball 63% of the time in neutral situations. That's 3 percentage points above the NFL average. A way different offense than when we have Zach Wilson under center, when they only throw the ball 51% of the time in the same scenario. So this is a Jets offense that's willing to air it out, and we have a young wide receiver getting into a larger role. So let's talk about his talent profile. So I'm not going to lie to you guys. It's been a rough season for Elijah Moore all the way around. Some of the underlying data that we try to look at that can sometimes point us towards what would the player look like if they had a larger role? Those data points haven't been necessarily great either. His targets per route run at 13%. His yards per route run at 0.96. Those are both really, really bad. However, what I will say for Moore, former second round pick last season, was really good just last year. And so it's still in the range of outcomes that it's been a tough stretch for him, but we've seen him do this before. In fact, last year, there was a stretch from week 7 to week 13 where you were elated to have Elijah Moore on your roster. He gave you 3 top 8 finishes in that stretch, and he averaged 17.7 points per game. So this is a guy that's available in most leagues, and he has the upside that we're looking for. So a lot of people are going to be scared off by Elijah Moore. Heck, you might have been the person that drafted him early in the season, and then rightfully so, you cut bait, and now you're looking at him on the waiver wire and you're like, Dwain, I don't want to pick this guy up. But remember, this late in the season, it's really hard to find someone that meets all the criteria that we are looking for upside. He checks all of them. We've talked about his passing offense. They're willing to throw the ball plenty of the time. We talked about his talent profile. He's shown us as recently as last year, this guy not just can come in and do okay in your fantasy lineup, he can be a difference maker. And then lastly, but not least, the only target competition that he has here is Garrett Wilson. Corey Davis could work his way back, but he's not really a guy that's going to demand a ton of targets. So that makes Elijah Moore someone that we really want to make sure we're adding to our benches. Even if you don't want to put him in your lineup this week, we could feel very, very differently about that as soon as week 16.